All right, order. Welcome to the College of Complexes. There are two rules here at the college. The first rule is one full at a time. The second rule is no personal attacks. The format is as follows. We'll have an announcements period, a brief announcements period, and announcements only, followed by our speaker, who'll have up to an hour to do a presentation, followed by a Q&A or a Q&A session, followed by our world famous rebuttals period. And then the speaker will have a final rebuttal at the end. So we will go into announcements, starting with Charlie.
Okay. All right, Charlie, when you're ready with the announcements, go ahead.
Yeah, bring up the screen.
I am. Come on. Okay, you got it there, Charlie?
Okay, and to the schedule. There we go. A little bit higher. Right there. Okay, welcome everyone to meeting number 3,823 of the College of Complexes, the playground for people who think. Now, though I am not a capitalist, I will give the advertisement for our upcoming programs. Next week on June 28th, we're going to be welcoming Wes Ure, a political analysis of an emerging political leader in Africa, West Africa. So a topic we don't cover too often at the college, about Brahman Traore, and about one of the least developed countries in the world and what's happening there, June 28th. On July the 5th, scroll up, yours truly, Charles Paydock. This is largely history of Canada, for those of you who don't know about it, but I'm going to be talking about the feasibility of an invasion and or annexation of Canada as a territory of the United States. I've got a very interesting PowerPoint not too long all set to go on the history of this northern future proper territory of the United States. On July the 12th, we'll be welcoming the American Indian Association of Chicago to bring us up to date on Native American affairs. Should be a good program. On July the 19th, we're going to be looking at eliminating the federal government altogether. No income taxes, living without a federal government structure. Should be a good program. Plenty to discuss. That leaves July 26th is open. If you'd like to speak, please furnish me with a title and a brief description of the presentation. We'll take a look at it. On August the 2nd, we'll be looking at historically the factors that brought an end to the Roman Empire, and are those present, those same factors evident in the United States of America right now. So the fall of the United States on August the 2nd. That leaves 4 dates open in August, the 9th, 16th, 23, 30. If you'd like to speak, please give me a hoot. Okay, Tim, thank you. Take it away.
Okay, Justin, you want to introduce me and we'll get going. All right, Justin, you want to... Thank you, sir.
All right. Tonight's topic, the Papal Encyclical RERUM NOVARUM. Can Christianity and capitalism coexist, or are they at odds with each other? In the presentation tonight will be Tim Bolger. The speaker states that he will cover the following. Does Christianity approve of free market capitalism for personal profit, or should the capitalists be made to share all the profits? Does someone who does not work get any profits? What do many hard work, why do many work hard but get few profits? Chasing profit isn't the problem, but ignoring injustice is. Before you defend capitalism or condemn it, ask yourself, does your faith shape your economics, or do your economics reshape your faith? The answer to these questions can be found in RERUM NOVARUM Encyclical of Pope Leo XIII. The rich must righteously refrain from cutting down the workman's earnings, either by force, by fraud, or by usurious dealing. And the poor should not put their trust in deceitful promises or try to gain by riot what they cannot get by honest labor. This piece explores the moral and theological implications of free market capitalism through the lens of Pope Leo XIII's Via Novarum, examining the balance between personal profit, social responsibility, and the rights of workers. It addresses whether Christian doctrine condemns individual profit, the ethical obligations to share wealth, and why disparities in labor and reward persist in capitalist systems. Let's welcome Tim Bolger.
Hey, Tim.
It's kind of crazy that I never thought in all my years of public speaking that I'd be giving a speech on a papal encyclical. Well, a lot of things have happened in the last 12 or 15 years. And in the last 2.5, particularly with having to take care of my elderly mother, who was raised a Roman Catholic. I personally was raised a Roman Catholic. I kind of had one of those come to Jesus moments in college as a sophomore, where I had the classic born again experience. And I basically learned my Bible and a lot of the things about this topic through the Protestant church. But having to take my mom again back to the Catholic Church, I've rediscovered a lot of what I remember as a child and a lot of what's going on. Well, today we confront a question of profound historical and contemporary significance. Can the principles of Christianity today coexist with the realities of capitalism? To seek an answer, we must embark on a journey back to the year 1891 to a foundational document in Catholic social teaching, Pope Leo XIII's seminal encyclical, Rerum Novarum, Latin for of new things. And let's put it back to you this way. Imagine a world in the late 19th century. It was a period of breathtaking transformation, marked by what we now call the Second Industrial Revolution. Factories, once small workshops, have grown into sprawling behemoths. New technology, steam power, electricity, mass production were reshaping economies and societies at such an unprecedented pace. Cities swelled as rural populations mitigated in search of work, often finding not prosperity, but crowded tenements and grim working conditions. Sort of like what we're seeing today a lot around the world, with a lot of the lower classes happening and the rise of unprecedented wealth. Personally, I think the world changed quite a bit during that time in the late Victorian era. We had electricity, we had the railroads, we had unprecedented change in the industrialization of America. And I think there's a big difference between today and back then. Number one, I think they did a lot of buildings a lot better architecturally. And second of all, I think the women looked a hell of a lot better back then. But anyway, that's a little cycle. This was an age of burgeoning industrial capitalism. While it unleashed incredible productive forces and generated immense wealth, it also spawned immense social challenges. The first was the rise of vast fortunes. The class of industrial magnates amassed unprecedented wealth, and it also had widespread poverty and exploitation. On the other side of the coin, millions of industrial workers, including women and children, toiled with meager wages in dangerous conditions, often for 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 or even 7 days a week. There was no social safety net, no workers' compensation, no unemployment benefits. Sickness or injury could mean immediate destitution. There was also growing social unrest. The stark inequalities fueled resentment. Socialist and communist ideologies, offering radical solutions based on class conflict and abolition of private property, gained traction, especially among the working classes. And there was a moral vacuum. Traditional social structures and ethical frameworks struggled to provide answers to these new things, the challenges of rapidly changing economic order. It was into this tumultuous landscape that Pope Leo XIII, a man deeply aware of both spiritual and material needs of his flock, issued Rerum Novarum, or New Things. This wasn't merely an academic treatise. It was a pastoral cry, a moral compass offered to a world adrift. The church, long concerned with the poor and vulnerable, recognized the urgency of responding to the new things with timeless truths. The encyclical sought to articulate principles of justice and charity that could guide both individuals and societies through the moral thicket of industrialization. It aimed to provide a third way, a path that rejected both the unchecked individualism of laissez-faire capitalism and the totalitarian tendencies of revolutionary socialism. It does in a lot of the things. First off, let's get with the affirmation of private property. One of the most frequently cited and sometimes misunderstood aspects of Rerum Novarum is the strong defense of the right to private property. Pope Leo XIII unequivocally affirmed this right as natural, rooted in human reason, and in the inherent dignity of the person. He argued that humans, unlike animals, possess reason and foresight, enabling them to plan for the future and secure a stable life for themselves and their families. This ability to exercise stewardship over resources, to possess something tangible derived from one's labor, contributes to your human flourishing and autonomy. It is an extension of our very personhood. This aligns at a foundational level with the core tenet of capitalist systems, the individual's right to control and property, including the means of production. Leo XIII saw private property as a bulwark against state overreach and as a necessary condition for stable family life. However, and this is crucially important, the affirmation of private property is not absolute. It is profoundly qualified by the concept of social mortgage or social function. The encyclical emphasizes that while individuals have the right to possess private property, they also bear a grave moral obligation to use it for the common good. Wealth, though legitimately required, is not solely for the owner's private enjoyment or accumulation. It carries with it inherent social responsibilities. Let us remember from Scripture a simple case that when God blesses an individual, Jesus himself said, through whom much is given, much is required. And did you know that over a third of Jesus's proclamations and teachings were about money? And they were about how the rich man should not take advantage of the poor. The thing is, Leo XIII warned specifically against the dangers of excessive wealth concentration. A small number of very rich men have been able to lay upon the teeming masses of laboring poor a yoke better than that of slavery itself. He implicitly critiques the form of capitalism where hoarding becomes an end in itself. Wealth is accumulated for its own sake, divorced from its purpose of serving human needs. Property rights are elevated above human rights. The right to accumulate supersedes the right to a dignified life for all. Speculation and exploitation. Land and capital are used to create value and support livelihoods. Land and capital are used not to create value and support livelihoods, but to extract wealth through the means that do not contribute to the real economy or exploit the vulnerable. A Christian perspective, as articulated by Leo XIII, reminds us that while all individuals have a right to possess, God intended the goods of the earth for the benefit of all humanity. Therefore, the wealthy are stewards, not absolute masters of their possessions. Their surplus wealth, Leo argued, should be shared, particularly with those in need. This profound ethical dimension fundamentally differentiates the Rerum Novarum vision of property from purely individualistic, unrestricted capitalist view. The dignity of labor and a just wage. Perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of Rerum Novarum was its passionate defense of the dignity of labor. In an era where workers were often viewed as mere cogs in an industrial machine, interchangeable and disposable commodities, Pope Leo XIII asserted their inherent worth and rights. He declared that, number one, Labor is not a commodity. It is simply an input in the production process to be bought and sold at the lowest market like raw materials. Labor is an activity performed by human beings, endowed with intellect and will, made in the image and likeness of God. The worker is a person, not a thing. The human person performing the work has dignity, and this dignity must be respected above all else. This means working conditions must be safe, hours reasonable, and treatment humane. And the worker has a right to a just wage. This was a radical concept for the time. Leo XIII argued that every worker has a right to a wage sufficient to support oneself and one's family in reasonable comfort, not just bare subsistence. A living wage should enable them to save a little, educate their children, and live a life befitting human dignity. It also should not be directed solely by the free market or the avarice employers. He even suggested that if a worker, by accepting a major wage, were to consent to conditions below human dignity, that contract would be unjust and invalid. The principle directly challenged the prevailing economic theories of the day, which often saw wages as simply a function of supply and demand, with no moral floor. Leo XIII strongly advocated that the right to workers to form associations and form unions to protect these interests and collectively bargain for better conditions and wages. He saw these associations not as disruptive forces, but as natural expressions of human sociability and a necessary counterweight to the immense power of capital. This was a bold stance for the church at that time, given that many governments and industrialists actively suppressed unions. The encyclical makes it clear any economic system that treats human labor merely as a cost to be minimized rather than a dignified activity to be justly compensated is fundamentally incompatible with Christian morality. It places profit above people. Now, I'm not saying that capitalism is wrong and the free market's wrong, because I still think it's the best way for goods to get distributed. A businessman comes in, he gets a team of workers, he provides a service to his customers. Those customers either will if he's a good businessman, they'll buy from him and they'll get him prosperous, and his workers will prosper. That's the way it should work. And there's also more in the advent of efficiency. You know, you should be able to earn a decent wage while working for a company. And yes, it is hard for the businessman to sometimes make profits because he's got to worry about inputs and costs and everything else. And you know, workers are an expense, and they should be treated with dignity, but not a cost to be minimized. The role of state and the principle of subsidiary. RERUM NOVARUM also provided a crucial framework for understanding the role of the state in economic affairs. Leo XIII was wary of both extremes. A state that does too much socialism and a state that does too little pure laissez-faire capitalism. He rejected socialism because it denied the right of private property and risked stifling individual liberty and initiative, leading to the deadly plague of state control. However, he equally rejected the idea that states should simply stand by and allow economic forces to operate unchecked, regardless of human cost. Instead, he articulated the state's positive duty to promote the common good and protect the rights of its citizens, especially the poor and vulnerable. This includes upholding justice, ensuring that contracts are fair, property rights are respected, and no one gets exploited, maintaining public order and peace. Economic instability and widespread injustice can lead to social breakdown. Protection of the weak. The state has a special obligations to those who cannot protect themselves, the working poor, the vulnerable, children, and women. This implies intervention to set minimum standards for wages, working hours, and safety. Promoting general prosperity. While respecting individual initiative, the state should create conditions conducive to widespread economic well-being, not just for the select few. The vision anticipates the later formalization of the principle of subsidiarity. While not especially named in RERUM NOVARUM, its spirit is clearly present. Subsidiarity holds that matters that should be handled by the smallest, lowest, or least centralized component of authority. In other words, Individuals and local communities should do what they can for themselves. However, when these lower levels are unable to address a problem effectively, higher levels of authority, including the state, have a duty to intervene and support and enable them or to correct injustices that local efforts cannot overcome. Thus, the state is not merely a white watchman, nor is it an all-encompassing manager. It is a servant of the common good, intervening proportionally and justly to ensure that economic life serves human dignity, not degrades it. The challenges of any capitalist ideology that insists on minimal government. This challenges any capitalist ideology that insists on minimal government interference, regardless of social consequences. Now we're going to go into the more interesting stuff. Social harmony versus class conflict. At the heart of the social question in Leo XIII's time was the escalating tension between capital and labor. Marxist thought, then gaining a significant traction, posited an irresistible and irreconcilable class struggle, leading to revolution and overthrow of the capitalist system. Pope Leo XIII emphatically rejected this notion of inherent class welfare, while acknowledging the very real differences of potential conflict for conflict between employers and employees. He argued that social harmony based on mutual need, shared responsibilities, and recognition of interdependence. He believed that capital and labor are not enemies, but partners. Both are necessary for a productive economy. As he put it, capital cannot do without labor, nor labor without capital. I'll repeat that. Capital cannot do without labor, and labor without capital. His vision was for an organic society. While different parts, though distinct, contributed synergistically to the well-being of the whole, he called upon both sides to exercise specific values. For employers and those with capital, justice and charity, treating workers fairly, paying just wages, and using wealth responsibly. For workers, it was diligence, honesty, and respect for property and authority. This insistence on cooperation over conflict, on the possibility of just peace between social classes, provides a profound moral counterpoint to capitalist systems that inadvertently foster extreme competition, social fragmentation, and a winner-take-all mentality. It encourages dialogue, negotiation, and a shared commitment to the common good rather than the useless pursuit of self-interest. In other words, what he's saying, guys, is that the encyclical, the Pope's saying we're all in this together, and we've all got to cooperate together, and we all got to move forward at a good rate. Whether you're rich or poor, you're all in the same planet. You're all in the same boat. You're all in the same stuff. And you know, the point of the matter is, if you cooperate and treat each other justly, we're going to have a much better world. The enduring legacy of and contemporary relevance. So returning back to our central question, are Christianity and capitalism compatible according to RERUM, NOVARUM, or new things? Even though this question may be given 100 years ago, I think it has all the relevance today because our society is a lot of ways paralleling that of the late 1880s, 1890s. The answer has been, as we have seen, is nuanced, conditional, and challenging. Capitalism, in its rawest, unregulated, and purely profit-driven form, a form that prioritizes accumulation above all else, excludes labor. It exploits labor, disregards social responsibility, and resists ethical oversight. It is not compatible with the Christian vision of justice and human dignity, aka it is pure greed. Such a system inevitably leads to exploitation, profound inequality, and a disregard for the sacred value of the human person. It reduces creation to mere resources and human beings to expendable instruments of production. However, capitalism, when understood not as an end in itself, but as a tool, and when fundamentally tempered and guided by moral Christian principles, can be compatible. The compatible form of capitalism is one that respects private property but emphasizes its social purpose, recognizing that ownership entails stewardship and a responsibility to the common good, ensures a dignity of labor and a just wage, prioritizing the human person over mere profit, guaranteeing fair compensation and humane working conditions, acknowledges the legitimate subsidiary role of the state, allowing for necessary interventions to protect the vulnerable, ensure justice, and promote the common good without stifling legitimate enterprise, fosters between social solidarity and cooperation. This encourages dialogue of mutual respect between capital and labor, rather than allowing unfettered competition to dissolve in a class conflict. And it prioritizes human flourishing. It measures economic success not by GDP growth or stock market indices, but by the widespread well-being, dignity, and opportunities offered to all members of society. RERUM NOVARUM, or New Things, was not an academic exercise. It was a call to action. It inaugurated a rich tradition of Catholic social teachings with subsequent encyclicals like Quadragesimo Anno, Master et Magista, Peplorium Progresso, Centus Imus Annus, and most recently, Laudato Si and Fratiatuli, building upon its foundations and applying its timeless principles to new global challenges, from globalization to technological change to environmental degradation and widening inequality. In essence, RERUM NOVARUM serves as a perennial challenge to all economic systems, including modern capitalism. It forces us to ask, do our economic systems truly serve humanity, uphold dignity, and foster justice, or do they merely serve the accumulation of wealth for a few? It reminds us with profound clarity that economic principles must be subordinate to moral ones, guided by the timeless truths of Christian faith, truth centered on the sanctity of human life, the demands of justice, and the transformative power of charity. This encyclical calls us to imbue economic activity without ethical considerations, placing the human person rather than profit as its absolute center. It is a profound invitation, as relevant today as it was over a century ago, to build an economy that is just not efficient, but also humane and truly relative to our shared Christian values. Now, I will entertain your questions.
All right, let's thank our speaker. We've got lots of time. It was we're at it's 5:40. So
Okay. All right.
who's got a question for Tim?
Loud, Mike.
By the way, you're laughing. What's the similarities between number 13 and 14?
What do you mean the similarities between number 13 and number 14?
Pope Leo the 13th and the new Pope.
Well, I think that the new Pope Leo took the name of the Leo the 13th because he recognized, he referenced Reverend Novarum when he became the new Pope. And I think he's trying to bring the current Catholic Church into a fundamental understanding that there is power with that faith he holds, and that there's power with bringing social justice back into the fold of our corporate mindset and corporate culture, and perhaps bringing the dignity of work and the dignity of the human being back to the forefront instead of unfettered greed. I think that some of the actions Pope Leo has taken, particularly with, I just heard today that he had appointed a new archbishop to a new bishop to the parish of San Diego. The Diocese of San Diego. And one of the first things this new bishop did was he went down and he said, we got to keep the poor and the needy. He asked several of his priests to go to immigration court and stop ICE in their tracks for deporting illegal immigrants. What happened was, when he went down there were several people who were going about trying to get their citizenship legally. There was one lady who was 20 years of legal residence, but they asked her to show up. ICE agents were there ready to drop her case to deport her. And she's been here 20 years. Well, what happened was when the priests came in, ICE agents all of a sudden just left. They weren't there to be seen at all. And, you know, I don't mind certain enforcement of our immigration laws, but there's also a way to do it to get rid of the criminals first, which means you go after those people who have committed crimes and not those who are here just trying to make a living. Now, some of the things that we're doing with our immigration laws are kind of out of whack a little bit, and I think this needs to be a lot of reform on those laws. And I mean, you know, it's kind of a shame that, you know, we had all these welcoming ordinances and welcoming cities spend all this money to bring these immigrants in, and now Trump's spending just as much money to get them out. The thing is, why not welcome them, give them a path to citizenship? Even Reagan did that in the 86 bill he had. When he did it, he had some amnesty. You paid a little fine, you got in there, and you had a path to citizenship. That's where I see us getting back to justice and bringing dignity back. Our problem is not migrants. Our problem is we may have let too many in too quick. And our problem is we have a clown in the White House right now who's treating our new migrants just like he did the Irish and the Catholics from 100 years ago, or even the Chinese. And it's a shame because those guys produce wealth, they get businesses, they buy things, they sell things, they get better. And by God, you know, those people that are coming to the United States being a melting pot, it's just crazy. I'm sorry, Mike, I know I'm going on. But Leo wanted to bring the problem with migrants, not only in our country, but around the world. You still see people coming from a place like Africa, literally risking their lives to cross the Mediterranean, literally trying to risk their lives to get out of places that they're not welcome or they're in dictatorships. But yet at the same time, you can have money go anywhere. A Russian oligarch before the war could invest in condominiums in Illinois, buy farmland here, and he could be an absentee owner. I kind of find that a little bit crazy. Next question. Yes.
Elaborate a little more on this private property ownership and Marxist concept of it.
Marx believed that the state owned everything, that you were given a wage by the state, and that, you know, everybody was supposedly equal. What my thinking was, what my understanding of Marxism is that, you know, everybody according to his need. No, I'm sorry, Charlie will probably know that. But each and everybody according to his need. And who tells you what your needs are? I mean, even in your so-called communist societies today, who are the rich guys? Those in government. Who are your guys who are in there? Today's Marxism is nothing what Marx preached about in Das Kapital. He did a lot of good insight into what happened when the rich get richer and there's unfettered greed. But what he didn't do is he didn't realize that human beings are sinners. They have a nature to where they can choose good or evil. And, you know, if you put that power in a state, you're going to get a Stalin. You put that power in a state, you're going to get a Mao Zedong. You're going to blame the capitalists who are rich and greedy, and not the very communist officials who are the same way. Is what I'm saying. So the state control has never worked. That's an extreme. I'm not saying that we don't need things like unemployment. We don't need things like healthcare. We don't need things because that's part of what government does, especially today. You know, and ours is the only country in the world that has the highest healthcare system with this goofy conglomeration of privatization and insurance.
All right, we'll go to Kelvin.
Okay, let me get Kelvin's question. All right, Kelvin, go ahead and
ask my question to you, Tim, is: do you not make a distinction between Christianity and Christendom? Because to my way of thinking, there has never been Christianity is just as an impossible system as communism is, and it's absolutely impossible to live by Jesus's rules. And it's just everybody's going to fall short. And Christendom has never had any problem bending the Christian doctrine to suit its needs. You talk about, for example, Pope Leo decrying great wealth, etc., etc. But you don't get any more great wealth than the Catholic Church itself. I was born in a small island in the Mediterranean called Malta, and about a mile or so from from the hospital where I was born, there's a cathedral with a solid gold roof. Now,
What's your question?
Pardon?
What's your question?
Do you not make a distinction between Christianity and Christendom? Christendom is a different thing than
The difference between Christianity and Christendom. Well, to answer your first question, Kelvin, nobody lives up to Jesus's teachings or perfection. That's why Christ died for mankind and his sins. Mankind cannot become God. They cannot follow every teaching that Jesus Christ did. Now, God demanded a sacrifice for sin, so he gave his only son that those who believe in him shall have eternal life. Now, does that mean that Christendom or the principles of Christianity can serve as a guideline for a good society? I think it does. Now, I know in times past that the big wealth that the Christian church had was probably one of the few places where you could actually get things done through the state. I mean, these cathedrals they built were sometimes 100, 200-year-long construction projects. And that means they had to have managers and money coming in. And that money a lot of times was taken from, the poor and the local parishes and everything else.
It seems a very, very hard way, a very convenient way to justify a solid gold roof.
Sure. Do we have you want to move on? Are you done, Tim, or do you want to move on?
The thing is, I'm not saying the church is perfect. It's ran by mankind. They too, at one point, had political power, and like most political cronies, they invested in their houses of worship and God. And having a solid gold roof and a steeple in a cathedral, I don't think is a good way to do it. I don't think there's anything wrong with having a nice cathedral in a church. But again, if your charity is not acclimating to the needs of the people around you, then it's kind of crazy. I just look at some of the stuff that the Diocese of Rockford's doing. And they have a lot of good charitable works going out, but they also have to have a building fund to keep and maintain the Catholic churches that they make already. And they also have to pay priests and nuns and other staff. And like any other organization, they are a rich one, but they also are held accountable in a lot of ways too. I mean, they still have tax laws to do. They still have things to take care of, and they got to be accountable to the Rome. And there's been a lot of scandals. I'm not saying that it's perfect. But the encyclical itself means you have certain principles of decency, of human dignity that I think we all can agree on. And Christendom, I think, is what those principles are. If you're an atheist and you're a moral one, I don't have a problem with you. If you're LGBTQ, but you're moral and you're honest, I don't care myself. If you're a Marxist-Leninist and you think that the state controls in there, but you're still a decent person, I'm still going to talk to you. There are principles of human dignity and human things that need to happen. I'm sorry. Okay, next question.
All right, let's go with Charlie.
All right, Charlie. Let me get the microphone near you. We'll go with you, Charlie. Okay, Charlie.
Yeah, Tim, at the time, the Catholic Church felt the threat of socialism and communism. They thought it was a very real threat. And this encyclical is nothing but a condemnation of socialists and communists. And don't give me a yada, yada, yada. There was another encyclical issued in the 30s, again, against socialism and communism.
Yeah.
So what is the bottom line is, don't give us, oh, this is, oh, we're condemned, very little condemnation or of the richest class, very little thing on social stratification. So all they did was give a, that's all it is the condemnation. They didn't let, they felt the threat of socialists and communists and wanted the people, don't listen. That's why they say, don't listen to the organizers. They're
Your
just,
question, Charlie.
all right.
I'll make a comment on that. I first have a question for Charlie. Did you actually read the encyclical?
I know
did.
what it was written as. Yes. He says, don't listen to any union organizers.
Well, from what my understanding of the encyclical was what exactly I said in the speech. It was more a cry for against greed, against corporate malfeasance, against workers being thieves, and for the betterment of human humanity under a free market system. And yes, Charlie, socialism in its pure form with full government control stifles individual initiative, and it also stifles economic activity. Once you have state control, you're nuts. Your pure communist societies, for example, are basically poor. They're looking to get some free market principles into them to run better. The best case is Cuba. If they would get some of the free market principles running in that country, they'd be much better off than they are now, because they're still stifled by their government and overregulation and overtaxation and stupidity. Or look at your Islamic Republic of Iran, the so-called Islamic State. It's nothing more than a stupid dictatorship. And even the Catholic Church back in the medieval century, when it was all rich and everything else, had a lot of the same characteristics. Now, what I am saying is that there is a necessary part for government. And I'm not being yada, yada, yada. Communism just didn't work. Socialism in its pure form doesn't work. You need benefits to help people who can't help themselves. Things like healthcare, things like unemployment insurance, things like, welfare, in a lot of cases, and Social Security. That I'm all for. And sometimes we may need a little bit more of it in the United States, given the certain amount of economic conditions we have with the free market we choose to live under. That means, for example, a worker in his 50s who's done a thing all his life may need to be retrained or may have to retire early, and he should be able to do so with dignity. Now, I'm not going to say that it's better handled at a local level or a state level or even a regional level than it is by government regulation. But sometimes you have to have that federal government come in, especially in like the enforcement of the equal rights, women's rights, things along these lines that are vast. That's why we have a nation of law. And that law must respect the will of the people. Okay, who's next, Jason?
Justin.
Justin, I'm sorry, Justin.
Who's else has got a question?
Mike.
Go ahead.
All right, Mike, loud, please.
America's a socialist society. Right? A lot of things are socialized through the government. Road, lighting for roads, schools, fire department, police department.
Police is socialism.
Jesus was socialist also. And I think what's going on here is people always confuse communism with socialism.
There's a big difference. All right, Mike. We don't live under capitalism right now. We live under oligarchy, which is where wealth is concentrated in a few corporations, and those guys are going to world. So we're not capitalist. We're living in an oligarchy right now. Governments that have excessive state control are communist or they're dictatorships. And socialism is a form of social control taken to an extreme. Now, I'm not saying some of the socialistic principles. I mean, even the Wealth of Nations in 1776, the supposed doctrine that all capitalist societies go off of, he talks about a commons, a field, a place where everybody holds in common. And he talks about raising taxes. He talks about things like police and the military and stuff you need that people cannot provide. Now, we are in a much more complex world today. I mean, we have roads, we have cars, we have computers, we have traffic. I mean, if you just imagine the amount of standardization it has to go to even connect up two computers on the same internet, it is amazing that we've been able to do it. There's a whole governing structure on the internet called the I think it's RFIC or something like that. But there's a whole bunch of governing documents that say, here's the protocols for email. Here's the protocols for the World Wide Web. Here are the standards you use. Even in consumer electronics, for example, you have a lot of cases where, the standard connectors in here. Even with electrical outlets around the world, we are 110 volts and the rest of the world is at 230. There's different plugs all over the place. What I'm simply saying is that, government needs to have a system where you value human dignity and you value human life and not just greed. Now, there is a place for fun.
You already asked your question. He's answering it.
Socialist.
I don't think America's socialist. I think we're having more government benefits come down because they're needed. And especially in a case like this, education, roads, bridges, healthcare. I mean, the only way police departments, fire departments, public utilities, your local zoning board, all that's necessary in a modern and complex society. And if somebody's going to tell me, oh, we don't need government, well, there is some times where you get too much regulation. And that's when you need to get rid of a few of them. You need to review some of these things, especially with some of the over permitting that might be required to open up a small business, or some of the stuff you got to go through hoops to get some type of grant aid or a lot of other stuff. And it's what I like to call, you don't need bureaucratic nitwittery, but you do need a bureaucracy to administer things like that. And one of the things the Trump administration's done is get rid of the essential machinery of bureaucracy and trying to replace it with skullduggery, trying to get rid of the very regulatory agencies that are trying to regulate his cronies and whatever. I'm sorry, Mike, but we may have some socialistic principles in there, but those socialistic principles are helping us prosper and maybe even save the free market system from going under, like it would have done if you just let it go unfettered with greed.
Jesus is socialist.
You already asked a question. We'll move on to the next person to ask a
We're moving
question.
on. We're moving on to the next question. Go ahead. Tell me who's next, Jason. Justin.
Who's got a question?
Justin, sorry. Anybody online still?
I got a question,
Go ahead,
Tim.
Justin.
So, how do you think that the Pope, the new Pope being from America, how do you think, if you can imagine what kind of encyclicals he writes, what do you think they'll be like?
That's a good question, because for me, I see in this Pope a lot of tradition. I also see a lot more compassion and a practicality that comes from maybe being from Chicago. I also see for the fact too that he's at a wedding ceremony. Somebody hands him a White Sox hat. He's in paper garb and he puts it on. Tells me he's very politically savvy too, but that he also knows too that what he does and how he lives and what he does will impact the church worldwide. If they see him enjoying himself, talking to the lower classes like Jesus did, he said he sat with tax collectors and sinners. I think this Pope has a lot of those same tendencies in it. He's still a new Pope. And he was picked by the College of Cardinals. I don't know why we have an American Pope from Chicago, because I never thought that would happen. I thought it'd be somebody more again from Italy or something else, but perhaps maybe it's time. You know, two things that Trump did was, number one, he gave us a World Series victory for the Cubs in his first term. And now in the second term, he may have given us a good Pope.
He wasn't president yet.
Well, I know he wasn't president yet, but the luck left Wrigley Field and went to Washington, and that was a good thing. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned about the government agencies. Would you agree that with the culture that they have in there, the best that they convert to some kind of a business style of operation? I mean, this operation with the government is detrimental to us.
I don't, if we're going to get into what business does and what government does, you forget they have to run on a budget. And if you go into any large corporation, they operate a lot like a government. And I think, well, you know what it's like dealing with, I do tracing and tracking for packages every day at a company in Franklin Park. And dealing with Amazon right now is even worse than dealing with some of the government agencies you got to do. If you're a vendor of theirs, they take it in there. They got all kinds of regulations you got to follow. And sometimes getting a claim paid can be nightmarish. It's like going to the IRS and getting a tooth pulled sometimes.
I agree with both sides, but don't you, we have to find some kind of a balance. I mean,
Well, the thing is,
doesn't fit all, right?
Understand this, okay? Even Milton Friedman, a radical free market economist, said there was a place for government and the law. And I just simply believe that, it's a balance. On the one hand, we have to have social benefits to keep people dignified. On the other hand, we have to keep a good, solid corporate base for innovation and moving forward. And it's a tough balance. I mean, I still think that one of the biggest and hardest occupations today is that of entrepreneur, that of founding a business and running it, making it grow. You not only have to be responsible for payroll, but for, state and local taxes and everything else. And they're looking at you. But that also means if you're willing to do that, you got a lot of responsibility, and you best take it seriously. Even in the gospel, it says, if you do this, you have responsibility. You just don't accumulate it for yourself, but you got to use it for your fellow man. And that your fellow man not only means your workers, your customers, but it also means investing in your business to help it prosper and grow so that it can employ more people over the time and help satisfy a market need. Go ahead.
One more thing is, my problem with the government, somebody gets in there elected, the government official, people elect them in there, they're using public funds, they hire everybody in their own family for this job, that job, they pass out contracts to their own people. There's something wrong about that.
Yes, there is.
Something very wrong.
It's called corruption.
Corruption is okay.
And the church also has a lot to say about corrupt officials. As a matter of fact, you can go and see the index of governance and what a kleptocracy is, which means you got to have a kickback or a bribe for getting anything done. And what Trump's doing is he's taking our democracy and starting to turn it into a kleptocracy. I'm sorry, but we have a greedy, self-maniacal me. I'm sorry, I don't want to get into this deeply, but we have a lot of our local politicians who are in it for themselves. They're just like the rich corporate businessmen who do nothing but want to accumulate. And they want to, quote, feather their nests. The thing is, public service should be just that, public service. And there's enough people in there now, I still believe that the vast majority are still trying to do good. The vast majority are trying to go in it. I remember a friend of mine who ran for public office. It was a town council position. All of a sudden, he just had a job. All of a sudden, all of a sudden was getting all these privileges that were coming his way. Free trips to vendors, free things to hear. The town might need a new machine and he'd get a free trip somewhere else. He said, hey, turn all that down. He says, I'm an honest guy. He said, let him come to our thing and bid on a contract. That's what it's there for. But he said, some of the incentives that a lot of these companies do to get business, they just try to feather their nest. And he was amazed at just the amount of what happens locally.
All right. Charlie's got his hand up.
All right, I'll get you down to speaker, Charlie, and we'll go back here. Okay,
All right, Charlie.
All right, Tim, historically, the Catholic Church has been affiliated with the rich aristocratic ruling class, particularly in Spain and under colonialism. Now you come along and you say suddenly the church is like in Russia, the church is affiliated with the ruling class. Now you come along and say, oh, we're the friend of the poor and the needy. Where have you been? Don't tell me where the church has ever not been affiliated with the rich ruling class.
All right. Thanks for your question.
All right, Charlie. The point of the matter is, Charlie, I can't get wrong with you on that. But I think that was also addressed in 1776 when we formed a better union and with the Constitutional Convention that gave us freedom of religion and freedom of assembly and freedom of the press. The church in the United States is not an institution that's government controlled. And when you have church leaders getting political power, of course they're going to associate with the rich. And the thing was, at one point, in the Middle Ages, being an international businessman was a despised occupation. You were much better off if you wanted a more sanctimonious life going into the clergy. And the funny thing is, the Catholic Church may have had a lot of wealth in Rome and a lot of wealth with the ruling classes. And I know the Vatican still does because of the only state that's got an official religion and that's recognized as a foreign country. But that's only been recently. What I think, Charlie, is that I have a lot of respect for the Catholic Church now. And I have a lot of respect for a lot of these other churches that are doing a lot of good things in our area. Take a look, for example, at the one in South Barrington called Willow Creek. They have a lot of charity. They have what they call a care center for people. When they have trouble, they can actually walk into it's called the Willow Creek Care Center. They can actually walk into an office and get some help if they need, whether a car gets fixed or rental assistance or other things. And they have some local programs that'll help do it on an individual basis. There's also a lot of other places that churches service community. Now, I don't think that, you get these corrupt popes, you get these things, but church has been around for 2,000 years. It's had a lot of corrupt things that happened to it. Look at the recent scandals of child abuse that were in the Catholic Church. It's finally getting to be dealt with. It's taken a while, but it's not a perfect organization. It's a mankind organization, and it's going to be, unless you keep up on due diligence of reform and on accountability, which is what a free press does, of course it's going to be that way. I'm not saying that it's all there. I'm just simply saying that the Pope had a lot to say about decency, about morality, about having worker being treated properly, and about the businessman not being a greedy son of a bitch.
Well, that way.
And I think what you're confusing about is that you have a tendency to think that socialism and communism are the way to go and that you should radically transform society, which plainly ain't going to work. What you need is people need to be decent. They need to treat each other better. And I'm not saying that you can't be if you're not a Christian, you can't simply do it, but there's norms that are suggested, treat thy neighbor as thyself. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. You may not love God, but you can certainly treat your neighbor as yourself. And the point of the matter is, people are in all kinds of different directions, different things, and there needs to be some type of leadership that comes in to help guide people. I mean, in Proverbs it says, "Raise a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not deviate from its ways." A lot of other things. The fool have said in his heart, there is no God. There's a lot of others that I could probably start quoting from memory. Oh yeah, who has woe? Who has strife? Who has wounds without cause? Those who tarry long over drink. They will be like one at the top of a mast, and the next day be at the bottom of the sea. Oh, where can I find relief from my woe? Where can I find relief from my tendencies? I will yet seek another drink. Perfect description of the alcoholic from the book of Proverbs from Solomon. Now you tell me, Charlie, I would much rather read a book of Proverbs that's in scripture and promulgated by an organization like the Catholic Church or like even a good Protestant church, and to read something like Das Kapital from Karl Marx, telling us that we should all sacrifice for the good revolution coming. That's nuts.
All right, who's got questions? I got one, Tim.
Okay.
And we've been at it for almost 40 minutes with the Q&A, but so I don't know what you want to do. But
That's okay.
my question is, have you read any of the other encyclicals, and what do you, if you have, which ones do you like?
I'm just now starting to look at this stuff. Reverend Novarum started this thing, and I was thoroughly confused with a lot of what Reverend Novarum was. And with the writing of this speech, I did what any good guy would do with the research tools available. Hello, Chat GPT. Hello, Google Gemini. And I found that as I wrote them, and I looked at the encyclical, and I looked at the speech, I did change it all around a little bit to make sure it fit, and to make sure that I had a good presentation. And a lot of what, even Chat GPT, the artificial intelligence, agrees with me. It's not about capitalism. It's not about socialism. It's about the human beings and treating them decently. And that's something we all have a choice to do, and a choice we have to make, and a choice that we need to do. That means you don't steal, you don't commit murder, you don't bear false witness. The basically derived versions of the 10 Commandments. Now, a lot of people say, but being faithful to your wives and husbands, that type of thing is just fairly common, basic human decency. And when you start deviating from those norms, you get all kinds of crazy stuff. Anyway, I'm not going to sit here and preach to you about this, because it's not about. I'll close with this, okay? A lot of people think that the religion of Christianity is the harm to society. We have up in Wisconsin the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which basically says no religions anywhere, no religion in government, no religion in public discourse. What I'm saying, though, is that we don't need religion. We need a moral compass. We need fair and basic human values to be taught, such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, some of the stuff that we need to recognize in the Constitution. And by God, we've addressed a lot of these problems already and keep addressing them. The United States is no bed of roses, but to be honest with you, I'd rather live here than most anywhere else, including now with our president, because at least we can demonstrate. You do realize that close to 2% of our population was out for the No Kings rally last weekend. And they are upset at our government and certain people in our government trying to get it corrupt. But again, it's up to you. How do you treat your people? How do you treat stuff like this? I remember when I was at a seminar one time about a small business guy, he said, never let anybody tell you it's just business. Because business and personal are there. If you get fired and he says it's just business, he says it's usually because he treats his other people that way too. Not just his employees, his cogs, but normally his friends as well. He said it's always personal. He said those relationships you make at work, those relationships you make in an organization, and the friendships you make are determined by your own inner character. So let nobody say it's just business, or no, it's just government policy. It's personal. It's the choices you make to do things. if your employer is going down a dark road and you start to get immoral, sometimes your best case is to resign. Sometimes your best case is to whistleblow. And sometimes the best thing to do, if it's minor, just to be obedient and let it go and let them learn from their own mistakes. And then when they do and they make it, you can say, I told you so. I got plenty of stuff on that. Anyway, do you think we should get into rebuttals now?
We'll take one from Kelvin and then we can go into rebuttals.
Kelvin, go ahead. Let me get to your microphone and do it. Let me
Okay,
get you on.
you were talking about
End with a question mark.
Okay, Kelvin.
you were talking about the separation of church and state, and how there are people, freedom from religion activists, that want a complete separation of church and state. Don't you think that this was one of the better things that the founding fathers did, to separate, to give freedom of religion in America, but also to keep religion out of government and government out of religion? Because religion actually hasn't been has got a very good track record when it comes to maintaining things like freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of ideas. It is a long and very dark history on suppression and torture and sectarian violence.
Okay.
And the reason why you guys chose to have a separation of church and state was to avoid all the things that you're looking to introduce. The church is not a very good moral compass.
I'm going to answer your question now.
Okay, Kelvin, I'm going to answer your question. From what I'm trying to say is you're saying that religion and some of the organized churches have not had a good track record with maintaining fundamental freedoms.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm going to have to say, I probably agree with you in a lot of cases too. Just remember, you know, recently, look at the scandal of the Catholic Church and child abuse. Look at some of the privileges that were being done. If you go back to like the era of the early 80s, like Jerry Falwell and his organization, or the PTL Club with Jim Baker and their organization. They were big Christian organizations that were corrupt to the core. I happened to do a lot of study into it in the early 80s, almost to the effect that I went and visited Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. And I also got on the 700 Club with Pat Robertson. There was a big difference between the two organizations. One was very welcoming, open, and happy to see you. The other was, oh, if you're not like us, you're a scumbag. And I got the difference in attitude between the both were there. Now, what does this mean for us? As I said before, Kelvin, the church and some of the things, you can't put faith in an organization or even sometimes in your fellow man. But if you put your faith in the Savior and his principles, I think we'll all be much better off.
Which is why I made the distinction between Christianity and Christendom. But the Catholic Church,
You already asked your question anyway.
Catholic Church maintains that it is
All right, okay.
it's God's vicar on earth, and it is God's masterpiece.
All right. If you want to rebut, let's go up here, and if you need to go on the computer, Justin's going to take care of it. So,
all right, who wants to give a rebuttal? We could do probably like 7 minutes.
6 or 7 minutes. So, come on up, Mike. Why don't you go first if you
You're ready to go.
Well, Joe is ready to go if he wants to go.
All right, if Joe wants to go.
I'm not. No, I'm not.
Okay.
You're ready.
Hold the microphone next to our speaker and let Joe go. Here, just hold it right.
Hey, my video and audio okay?
Yes.
Yeah, a little louder. Just hold the microphone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for the presentation, Tim. I agree that when you said we need morality, not religion, I agree with that. We need human dignity. And I'm glad that you mentioned the idea of subsidiarity. I think that fits in line with decentralization. Just one little issue I have with that. I haven't read the Encyclical, but I should probably do that. Well, it says, you know, according to you quoting it, well, it promotes subsidiarity. It also says there's a role for the state. And I think there's ways we can do decentralization that could involve getting rid of the central state, DC or whatever, the federal government completely. And it's almost like the Catholic Church would have every reason to promote not getting rid of a state, because it's almost like the Catholic Church and the EU kind of function as centralized states within the European continent. And I think there's ways to do without that. I just want to dispute some of the definitions of communism and socialism that were quoted. I wouldn't define communism as totalitarian government. I'm not saying that there's never been a socialist revolution that's led to totalitarianism. You can call that whatever you want, but Lenin in State and Revolution said that there would be no state and there would be no borders and no money, and it'd be unnecessary to have like a mechanism of violence and oppression. And he described the withering away of the state, and he said communism is a political ideology that is stateless. And I would define socialism as the economic system that usually goes with communism but doesn't always. And I would dispute what Tim said about saying that socialism is extreme social control. That's some people's definition. Lenin actually explained that he wanted no social control, but for society to control production, not each other. So I agree with what Charlie said about that Catholic Church is usually supported the ruling class. In fact, they did in the Spanish Revolution. They supported Franco, and they supported the Carlist dynasty. See, there's 7 countries in Europe. 2 of them are UK and Spain. 7 countries' royal families are related to each other, and they have lineage going back 200 years to the Germans and the Danish. So I don't think it's really fair that 7 countries in Europe out of 20, 25 are run by the same family. And that's the kind of wealth that the Catholic Church is not ashamed to represent. I think maybe they should hesitate a little about that. And I agree with Kelvin that the golden dome on the churches is a problem. It reflects hypocrisy and greediness. And it's not just the golden domes, but we don't even know what the Catholic Church is sitting on in terms of catacombs and bodies of saints that maybe they might have helped kill, for example, martyrs, and maybe even hoarded religious statues and artifacts from civilizations that were looted by the Roman Empire. Like the amount of wealth and historical value that the Catholic Church is sitting on is just, it's incomprehensible. So that's the kind of, and if you want to watch a movie about the hypocrisy of the Catholic Church in terms of wealth and the poor, watch a movie from the 70s called Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon. And also look into the topic of baby hatches. There are people who have surrendered their babies right into a little compartment on the side of the church. And they never got to find out what happened to those kids. And I'm glad Tim is acknowledging, there's a child sexual abuse scandal in the church. There was an article that came out recently saying the new Pope might have helped cover that up. I haven't looked into that yet, but I think we should all check that out. And it's possible that around 100,000 kids just in France alone were abused by the church. So yeah, the church has a lot to atone for. That doesn't mean it doesn't say the right things. This, from Tim's explanation, it sounds like the encyclical makes a lot of sense. I think it leaves too much room for the state to keep existing and centralization, and doesn't really prescribe punishments. It has limits on how much private property you can own, including in the means of production, but there's no punishment for. They're like, oh, you shouldn't hoard wealth. You should treat the poor right. It's like, okay, what if I don't? There's no consequences, right? I can go to your church and claim sanctuary. Like those are my concerns. Thanks for listening.
All right. Who's got a rebuttal?
Ready?
All right, Kelvin, you got 6 minutes.
Yeah, I was cut off there before my question. The separation of church and state is integral to the American system. You mess with that at your peril. When the founding fathers instigated this, they were, for one thing, they would have had very, very great difficulty in establishing a state religion, as most individual states had different sects of Christianity. Some were Presbyterian, some were Baptist, some were Anabaptist, some were, there was, if you look around at all the various different states, so you wouldn't have had one state religion. There is, unless you made one yourself, like Henry VIII did. the other reason why you talk about the abuses of the Catholic Church of Europe, there were no more the most prevalent in the states where the Catholic Church was embedded into government, as in Ireland and in France, where the priests could operate with almost state immunity. So I don't. I mean, there are many good Christians, and there are a lot of Christians with good morals, but there are an awful lot of good people and people with good morals. There is a tendency in America to think that morals will only come from the pulpit. This is not true for most of the world. In places like where I live in the UK, most people are not religious. Atheism is around about 49, 50, 51%, something like that. You might get people who say that, well, I believe in God, but I don't go to church or whatever. You know, this is not we get by perfectly well without it. And Joseph, I do take on when you say the royal family is control the government. No, you don't understand the nature of a constitutional monarchy. They're just basically a non-voting chairman. This is not a ruling class. This is a symbolic class. It's nothing. The rulers are industrialists and the political industrial regime. It's not that one for family of monarchs. It's been a long time since monarchs had any power to speak of.
Okay.
Is that it?
Yeah, I'm done.
All right.
All right.
Is Charlie gone yet?
Charlie, go ahead.
All right, Charlie, go ahead.
All right.
Go ahead, Charlie.
All right.
Charlie.
Well, I'd like to thank Tim for a very nice study of a topic we have not considered. I've got only 4 things to say regarding this. Now, you have to remember that there's not much discussion about encyclicals, except for this one. And why is that? Because the Roman Catholics like to say that when it comes to social justice, they like to always cite this as an example. The late Pat Butler used to do it all the time. RERUM NOVARUM. The church has taken a stand for the working men. But few of those individuals ever take the time to understand why this encyclical was written, why it was written, and what it says. And that's what I'm going to try to cover here very briefly. At the time, the communist movement was growing significantly, the anarchist movement with it, both in the United States and in particular in Europe, in Italy and other countries. The church felt threatened by this movement, which was clearly antithetical to the dictatorial structure of the Roman Catholic Church, which had sided with the aristocracy in many cases. They felt threatened by it. So they tried to come up with some reasoning to dissuade people from following it. Now, if you look at the document, that's the number one, is the threat was very real at the time. And the conditions, the working conditions, were about as abysmal as one could find. The situation, I gave a talk on the history of revolutions. Believe you me, the settings were there. And it was eminent that change was in progress. Now, number 2, you have to look at, there's a distinction in the encyclical between the mandates for the working man and there's mandates for the capitalists. The mandates for the capitalists are very weak, even if non-existent. Sort of like, well, you should be nice. Be nice. It's about all it says. No condemnation. These are the people perpetrating the oppression. Are you kidding me? They don't deserve any condemnation, as you found in the manifesto. Are you for real? Is that all you've got to say about the capitalist classes? Well, maybe you should be nicer. All right, the third one is, and this is a distant thing, is it's somewhat been said that no religion will ever be at the forefront of social change. There's conservative aspects to religion, basically because of their cosmology, I believe, but you'll never see them at the forefront of a social movement. You could discuss this either way. However, is particularly with a thing like socialism, the implementation of socialism and communism, churches are basically what I'm saying in terms of their infrastructure, their antithesis to anything of this nature. So there's an inherent conservatism built in the structure. And last of all, Tim, yes, I realize churches do good from occasion from here and there, but you cannot disregard the fact that a church may have a food pantry or even several churches, but that has nothing to compare to the provision of food and nutrition by something like food stamps or the CAPS program. There's nothing at the scale that can achieve the good that the churches can never reach that level by any means whatsoever. And if you want to really bring about social change and positive social change, that can only be brought about through the administration of government. And it's not going to happen through some private, mysticated, scattered efforts in that regard. Anyhow, thank you very much. It was an interesting talk, and it made me look at the encyclical again. Thank you.
All right. Who else wants to go?
Microphone up to him. And, Mike, you got 7 minutes, I guess. So you got your things. Let me get your mic up here and go ahead. Here. Oh, okay. All right. I gotta say one thing. At least you agree with the openness. And one thing,
I kind of agree with Charlie here that it sounds like we're a world of corrupt leaders that like tax cuts, that like wars, that like crime, and they like corruption. Of course, we got the filthy 500 in Washington, D.C., and it looks like the Trump crime family is corrupt more and more. And that was a problem 8 years ago, 4 years ago. Whatever. Anyway, so yeah, with what Charlie said is that I think the church, I guess the Pope is the biggest leader of ethical and moral thought in the world, and probably all the religions. And I'm glad to see him starting to voice opinions. He'll have to get comfortable and have put in some time there. And yeah, he's got to put some force and bite into these politicians that are roughshod, just making the world more criminal and more corrupt. And yeah, so the church does have an opportunity and a responsibility to point out the anti-moral, anti-ethical behavior of the governments in the world, including this one, America. I feel that America has really gone downhill since 9/11, and I remember the 90s, the 80s, some of the 70s pretty well, and I think there's some big problems. It's just grown and grown ever since 9/11. The 80s seemed okay with Bush and even Reagan, and then 90s were pretty good, of course. Clinton was all right, not that bad. He was a bit of a player. And then 9/11 happened, and there's been just oil wars and more wars and corruption and bailouts of the rich. And the church needs to point this stuff out. So right now we're going to get involved in more wars, maybe nuclear wars.
the church has to come out strong against that. And then and now we're going to bail out the super rich again. Apparently, our budget being controlled by the far right. And it looks like they want to have all kinds of benefits cut, people thrown off of Medicaid and health care. Knows what else that'll be cut. But tax breaks for the super rich. And the church should come out against those two items strongly. The tax cuts for the super rich by the Republicans, and then the wars. One thing about this speech, I kept on asking, is Jesus a socialist? I mean, it seems like what he talked about and represented was socialist values, Jesus, and it bothers me that people confuse socialism with communism all the time. And I know America is a socialist country, and I know most European countries are socialist. Maybe some to a bigger degree, but they're generally socialist. They're not communist. America's not communist, but it is a socialist type of administration and government, and it does a lot of good things, unless they start cutting back on the good things, and that could cause more problems in this country too. So that's about all I got to say there. Who else is going to go? Ernie, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Ernie.
Socialists.
I think you're going to have some good words of wisdom for us tonight, honey.
I don't know if I am or not.
Well, you're obviously learning. All right, let's give a round for Ernie.
All right.
No. Actually, I don't know enough about the Encyclical or about the Bible to really comment on the talk tonight. We certainly would like to believe that the religious leaders are moral and want better things for the people, even though, strangely enough, some of the greatest sins seem to come from the church and church people from time to time. Actually, what I primarily want to do is disagree with Mike, I guess. He says that the U.S. is socialist. I don't want to 100% disagree. I think the U.S. is partially socialist. I mean, you look at our schools, our roads, our fire, our police, and many other key services that we have are put out by the government, which is by definition socialist. In other words, if the means of production are owned by the government and operated by the government, that's socialism. But we're not entirely socialist. Most of our economic growth and our economic activity comes at a private level. And in fact, almost all countries, I've said this so many times up here, all countries today and in the past are an amalgam of different systems that are around. Socialism, all countries have an element of socialism, a little more in Europe than here. But they're also free market countries. And it just depends on the degree and what area you're talking about. All countries have elements of both, and always did. I mean, even in the communist countries, there were some small businesses were allowed, and people, had little enterprises. Sometimes they weren't legal, but they did it. So there's a combination. The economic systems there's always a combination between the different systems. Now, Mike also said that our politicians, anyway, I don't like tax cuts, or don't like taxes or tax cuts. I don't know what you said, but what in any case, most people in government like taxes. They don't like to pay taxes, and they don't like to have some of their constituents pay taxes as much. And there's a big shift going on now in our country with Trump shifting the tax burden from the higher income people down to the lower income to a degree, not as much as it should be. I think now that the people at the higher end pay too little as it is, and Trump wants them to pay even less. So he's installing these regressive taxes called tariffs. Basically, who ultimately pays tariffs are the consumer. Okay, the importers pay the checks initially to the government, but then they have to raise the prices. They have to. I mean, you can't if a major input to whatever it is that you're selling, whether it be a product or a service, if your costs go up, your prices have to go up at some point. And so who pays? The consumer, and particularly lower income consumers. The lower you are on the scale, the more it affects you. So that's unfortunate. Doesn't have a whole lot to do with the religion, but it's definitely unfortunate. Now, our congressman came to visit our building yesterday, in fact, and we quizzed him a little bit on some of these things. I believe that Trump wants to cut out 85% of the health care workers in the veterans medical system. I wouldn't like to see that, of course, because that's where I go. But he also said that HUD and housing or housing are going to see a 51% cut if Trump gets his way. Now, the question is, all of this is being negotiated now, and it's hard to say exactly where it's going to go. We tried to get him to pin him down a little bit more, but 51% is what they're asking for. And it was pointed out to me that in this great big, what they call the great big beautiful bill, others call it the great big ugly bill, one of the provisions are some provisions which will prevent judges from clamping down on Trump and his people. I don't fully understand all the details, but
We're going.
Well, the mic went out, Tim.
All right. Maryland from the Texas group pointed out Robert Wright, you know who he is.
Yeah.
For whom I have a great deal of respect, actually. He said that there are some provisions in this big, beautiful bill which will forbid judges from going after Trump and some of his cronies. I do not understand the details of that, but I believe it's something that somebody has to look into. Almost nobody's heard of it. All right, and that's probably the biggest problem.
Dictatorship.
is it on again? It's on again. So great. What?
One foot at a time. Bernie's talking, not
What?
you.
No, let him ask the question. What? Well, quickly, yes, but that's not what this thing I'm talking about now. The special provision. Okay, that was Maryland, who is part of the College of Complexes at Dallas. She found that. Okay, and but Quigley was at our building, and he also I asked him about the fact that our country is now becoming a co-offender of war crimes. 80% of the ordnance which Israel uses comes from the U.S. and the U.S. could put a stop to what's going on over there if they wanted to. They do not want to. They're letting Netanyahu kill as many people as he wants, which to me is a terrible thing. And Netanyahu claims that it's a 1-to-1 ratio, Hamas fighter versus innocent civilian that's getting killed. I don't believe that. Okay, you may believe that, but somewhere around half of the people killed are women and children. Very unlikely that many of them at all are Hamas fighters. What's that?
7 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll only take another couple minutes. No, I basically I'm done, and I'm very unhappy with the direction of a lot of things now. I don't think that the church can bring us out of it. I wish it could, but we'll keep our eyes open. Thank you.
There we go. All right. Okay.
I think the topic tonight was very interesting, and it hasn't been discussed here. And I'm kind of like, wish I would have thought of it first. A lot of things in this encyclical are very interesting, and so are a lot of other encyclicals. I personally like the encyclicals of Pope Leo not Pope Leo, Pope Pius the 11th, who was Pope until 1939. He wrote encyclicals against socialism, against communism, against fascism. And then he also wrote, and I'm gonna butcher. I'm not gonna even attempt to do the Latin, but basically the 40th anniversary encyclical of Rerum Novarum, which I think is 40 years after, or something like that. I may have that wrong. Translated into that title, translated from Latin. There are a lot of things that Catholic social teaching is compatible with in a general American system, or even in a capitalist libertarian sort of system. Subsidiary or sort of already exists in the 10th Amendment, and I think certainly a lot of socialist animosity towards the church is because of I think it does a better job at doing helping the lowly than socialism purports to help. I believe that socialism, it seems what definition floated here just meant socialism is when government does things. The cops are socialists, firefighters are socialists, roads are socialists. I do not believe for 1 minute that's what socialists had in mind when they are defining socialism, because those things existed before socialism was even the modern concept even became a thing. I don't think Jesus was a socialist in any sense. He was against coercion. He thought that this, he didn't want to associate or involve himself with the state, and he rejected, the temptation of Satan to rule over all the kingdoms of the world. I guess that is all I have to say. I would certainly like to reread Rerum Novarum. I would like to also reread some of the other classic Catholic social teaching documents. I also like Pasham and Terrace is a good one. I'm very curious that what our new Pope's encyclicals will be like. Thank you.
Right. Anybody else? Nobody online?
Anybody online want to give a rebuttal?
No more? No.
Just can I just make one point? There is a provision for socialism in the Bible. If you take
Someone already gave a
Bible
rebuttal earlier.
the Bible as a whole, the Torah commands that you give 5%.
Hey, Calvin, we don't have a microphone up, and you already gave a rebuttal, and Russell is going to give one right now.
Okay, fair enough.
A very good thing I would say. Greed is good. Greed works. And the idea that Jesus was socialist, these ideas of socialism it didn't start for another 1600 years. Even capitalism as we know it today, some would say maybe the later 1700s, early 1800s really didn't get going. Large businesses really didn't start till after the Civil War. These are all modern ideas. And that's basically my point.
All right.
Anybody else?
Jesus fed 5,000 at the Sermon on the Mount.
They've already gone.
Yeah, wow.
The Old Testament demands that you give 5% of your crop for the poor.
All right.
If anybody has anything else new to add, I can take it a little bit. We'll go. Oh, you got some, you want to, oh, if anybody else has anything new they want to add online, now's the
Yeah.
time to speak. All right, Charlie, let's get you online. ahead.
Just quickly, Russ says that there's some debate whether or not socialism appears in scriptures. Well, Jesus gave a sermon. I believe there were 5,000 people there. And then it was time for dinner. And they came up, what happened that there was not, a lot of people think there was a miracle and he multiplied the bread and the fishes. The real miracle was that they shared what food everyone brought to that event. That was the implementation. There is socialism. There was no miracle of multiplying fish or bread, loaves. The real miracle was the fact that the people, for the first time, embraced socialism. That was what they learned by the sermon that day. That it's better to share with what you have with your community. Thank you.
Anybody else? Kelvin, do you want to say anything now?
What I said before. The socialism was already there in the Old Testament, in the Torah. You had to give 5% of your crop to the poor. You only harvested 95% of your crop. You left the other 5% for the poor. It's there in the Bible.
Yeah, it's called the tithe. I know what you're talking about.
No.
Yeah. So there's but the thing is difference between socialism and Jesus' teaching. If the Good Samaritan was a socialist, he wouldn't have got involved because that would have put him in danger. What he would have done is he would have campaigned for better policing and better lighting on the Jericho Road. Just a thought.
Good point. All right. Anybody else here? He just said that.
Better.
He just said that if the guy was a socialist, he wouldn't have given the good thief help. He would have been campaigning. He'd have walked by him and campaigned for better policing on the Jericho Road.
The socialists want cops, so I guess.
Yeah, it's something. All right. All I can say is this. I just want to say thank you again for, coming to hear me tonight. I appreciate you guys coming to the college and hearing everything. And I hope that me and Charlie can continue to have this forum for you. And I'm not going to have any profound closing thoughts because I think we've gotten the subject pretty well covered. In other words, we need a decent world. Just a closing thought. We may seem to be more divided today, but just remember, social media tends to magnify the differences and not the things. We still go to the grocery store. We still go to our neighbors and we still get along pretty well together. Perhaps it's maybe not so much the blatant and rampant corruption we're seeing, but maybe it's just been magnified because of the newer media news cycle that we're having where the world's gotten so small that if a guy sneezes wrong, the rest of the world will hear about it. Anyway, thank you for coming. Appreciate all you guys. This college is now adjourned.
You could say there was elements of the end and go.